All right. Welcome to the October 23rd, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. I'm going to do a quick audio test to make sure everything is okay on my end. Bear with me just for a moment. This way I don't do a whole presentation without any audio. So let me just make sure. Okay, so it sounds like that's coming through. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host of the Hangout today. If you have not attended a Club Cubase Google Hangout before, how it's going to work is you can send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could enter comments in the chat field in the live chat area. So as questions are asked, the questions can get asked much quicker than my ability to respond to them. So, if you don't see, as the Hangout is going on, if you don't see your question immediately getting answered, if it's in the chat field, I'll try to get through as many of them chronologically as possible. So we'll try to go for about a little under 4 hours today. So as we do this, and if I don't get to your question immediately, kind of asking the question repeatedly in the chat field doesn't speed anything up. So it just kind of slows down the whole process. So if we could try to avoid doing that. Also, when asking questions, if we could try to say, I'm running Cubase 10.5 Pro on Mac, or I'm running Cubase Elements 8 on PC. Sometimes that information is also helpful so we know which level of the program you're at. So if you're watching this live, you can go ahead and feel free to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from. Good to see some familiar faces. If you are watching the replay of the stream, you could skip ahead to about 10 minutes after people get logged in. So we'll see how, so you may want to skip ahead, but we'll let people do introductions. You're going to give a couple minutes for people to get logged in before we get started. I do have some workers next door and workers at my house, so I'll apologize if you hear any bangs or pops. We just had some hammering that was just going on a couple minutes ago. So it sounds like maybe it's done, but there's a chance we're having a sprinkler system put in for our grass. So I apologize for any noises that you hear. Also, my family is at home, so you may hear my wife above me who's working from home. And my son may interrupt during the Hangout, so I apologize in advance for that. So we'll try to have the Hangout questions indexed later tonight with all the different topics. So we could refer straight back to the different topics of discussion during the Hangout today. So let's go ahead and see who is on today. And we'll, again, maybe at about 10 minutes after the hour, we'll get started with the live section. So let's see how it's going so far. All right, so we see Ace from Texas. We have Michael Michaels with some questions. Oral Cole. All right, so we see Sir Robert from Atlanta. Also, if this is your first Club Cubase Google Hangout, feel free to enter in the chat and let us know. So we want to welcome you guys. All right, so we have Jay from Connecticut. We have John Costigan. It's apparently rainy in Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, so we have Dusseldorf. All right, also I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States, just in Alexandria, Virginia. So it's only fair that I get to introduce where I'm from with all of this. All right, so we have Millard Brown from Pennsylvania. Good to see you on. All right, so we have Agent K, who's always kind enough to do some moderation for us when needed. All right, so we have Stefan from Sweden. All right, so we have Pete from Amsterdam. All right, so we have Jazz Dude from Germany. I believe he's in Heidelberg. All right, so we have Werner Paul Vostmann from Germany as well. I probably totally butchered the pronunciation of your name. All right, so we have Captenergy Music. We have Germany, Sweden, Romania. We see Ted from Sherman Oaks. All right, so we have Jordan from Amman, Jordan. All right, so let's see. We have Valerio from Milan. Good to see you on a hangout. We have Pablo from Galicia, España. All right, so we have Steve from Northumberland in the UK. All right, so we have Steve, first time looking in from Azores. All right, so we have Matthias from Hamburg, Germany. All right, we have Abdul from Saudi Arabia. All right, so just see Abdul's question. Can you talk about Cubase plugin in brief? Thanks. If I'm not sure if there's a particular plugin that you're looking for, but if you could let us know. All right, so we have India, Germany, Switzerland, El Salvador. Okay, so let's see who else is on. All right, so we have Jerry from Swindon, UK, Romania. All right, so Ted from Sherman Oaks. All right, some more people from Romania. All right. So again, we'll wait just a couple minutes, and if you guys have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask them in the chats field. All right, so we also have Bangalore, India, Vienna. It's the one city I've always wanted to go to. All right, so we have Israel. All right, so just getting some more people logged in. All right, so I see a question about two analog modules and mid-side configuration. So when you say two analog modules, are those synth modules? Is this from At the Source Studios, or is it just audio tracks? So, all right, so we have Jeff from Chico, California. We have India. So maybe we get a clarification. Well, all right, so we have Delhi. So we have a strong contingent from India present today. So I think we have 5 continents. Let's see. Or 4. Let's see if we have anyone from Australia. So we have 4 continents. We don't have Australia. It's like 2 in the morning there or something. Or 3 in the morning. Sometimes on Tuesdays we get people working the night shift. All right, so we have New Jersey. Okay. All right, so At Source Studios from Chicago. Been there a zillion times. All right, more people from India. All right. So At the Source Studios, Agent K is on the Hangout. So he was just asking. All right, so seeing some more questions. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford. We have Macedonia. Some more people getting logged in. And if you haven't subscribed to the Cubase YouTube channel, make sure you do that. Okay, so we see explain analog to use as a VST plugin. So I assume that's like maybe an external analog processor, how to use as an external plugin. This is from Kunal Goswami. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Okay. See how we're doing on time. Maybe another 30 seconds and we'll get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we have some great questions. And again, great to see everyone on a Friday afternoon. All right, so a question. Hi, Greg. Hope you and your family are safe and doing well. We're doing great. Thank you for asking. I have a project using mostly 24-bit samples, but I want to add 16-bit waves to it. Should I convert 16 to 24-bit? I'm in Cubase Pro or Cubase 10.5. So as you work with Cubase, you're not going to gain any sonic advantage taking a 16-bit file and just kind of rewriting it as 24 bits. But Cubase can have multiple file formats and multiple audio file bit depths within the same project. So you don't really have to do anything. So you could have your 24-bit, a 16-bit, a 32-bit integer, 32-bit float file, all resident within the same exact project. So there's no problems there being able to manage that. So again, if there was a sonic advantage to re-recording your 16-bit to 24-bit, but it's really just going to take up more space on your particular system. So no problems with having multiple file bit depths in the same project. So we have a question from Michael Michaels. Hi, Greg. Can Cubase find the key of a MIDI file? So let's say if I have this particular project here, and this has like a piano part, and we'll just look at it quickly in our score editor. So if I just wanted to see, so as we say, okay, just look at it in our score editor in the lower zone. So we could do that, and if I have this part selected, we could kind of do an extraction. So if we go to our project menu to chord track, and then we want to say create chord symbols. Generally, I leave the top two checked, and then as I do that, it's now automatically created the chord track for us. And if we look here, it's automatically created the key of the song. So if I wanted to look at this, it's going to tell us that the key of the song is set to G major. So this is what the key of your project could be. So just taking, a couple of different tracks, and you could select multiple tracks if you want it. But just the MIDI part, something that has chords, you could automatically kind of, again, go into project menu to chord track and say create chord symbols, and that will automatically tell you, do an analysis of your part and have it determine the key for you. All right, so kind of a secondary question. Is there a drum trigger built into Cubase? So we could do this with hit points. So let's say if I go to this project, I could go ahead, we'll just load this up, and let's say if I want to do drum triggers. So let's say I have a drum kit loaded up here, and I wanted to take the audio recordings and trigger the actual sounds here. So all I'd have to do is I'll leave that track selected. I could double click, go into my sample editor, and at this point I will go to my hit points. Let's go ahead and edit the hit points. And what we want to do is to kind of set the threshold so that we're hearing the kicks and not the tracks that are bleeding through. And at this point, you'll see at the very bottom of the hit points inspector tab, we can see create MIDI notes. So at this point, I will choose to create the MIDI notes, and I will assign it to the selected track where I had that groove agent. We could retain the dynamic velocity. So I'll hit OK, and now we have the original audio file. And I'm going to do it to the correct pitch this time. That would be helpful. So say I want it to be C1 where I have a kick drum. So now as we play, it's just triggering my groove agent. So if I wanted to mute the kick drums, say I want to make my kick louder or tune it. So once you've kind of extracted the hit points, all you have to do is, double click on it, extract the hit points, and then just create VST or create MIDI notes, and that will kind of act as a trigger, and you could edit. That will retain the velocities that were, so we can see on the MIDI part itself that we could have the velocity variations that were actually in the original audio file. So that's how you could do drum triggering in Cubase quite easily. And that way, you don't have to worry about like the trigger missing like one time in the whole song. You could just have that automatically as MIDI parts and be able to change the sounds quite easily. Okay. Thanks for all the great questions. Let me just scroll through. Great to see people from all over the world. And also Matt from Fort Wayne. We have Old Hampshire. And at some point, probably my chat field may jump and I may lose some questions, but we'll try to get through them as quickly as possible. All right, so question from Ted Springman. If I want to use Cubase Hallion to create a tempo-based sample playback VST instrument of my own sound design and market through a VST-centric platform, what steps would you recommend? So a lot of times, as you have a sample, so let's say, if I wanted to come over here and, have a particular drum loop, so let's say if you want to figure out like how to make your samples kind of automatically fit, so let's say if I have, this particular drum loop going on, and let's say if I wanted to, and you could do it a number of different ways. So even if you have a sampler track, in Cubase, you can do this in Hallion as well. But if we just enable audio warp here, and then we could choose to, sync to tempo. So kind of whatever tempo you have, you could come over here and just, so let's see. So if I wanted to. So you could choose to have that kind of automatically synchronized to the tempo. So, you could do that inside of, Groove Agent or Hallion. And then once you're kind of done with that, if you make your own instruments, so let's say I'll add a quick instrument track. Let's take this to Hallion. All right, so I will just kind of come here. Let's drag this sample right over. And at this point, if you go to like let's edit this particular sound. So you can come right over here. And then if you wanted to go to the mapping, you could. So at this point, you could. And then once you could come over here, let's say, I think we could put it into, let me just see, I probably won't be able to find it quickly, but you could put it into, audio warp mode. So let's say if I want to put this into audio warp mode and we could put it into music and, we want this to. So it's going to play back kind of the same tempo that you want. So, and then once you have this done, you could go through the whole process of, making a particular instrument. So as you wanted to, come, and you could choose kind of different startup windows if you wanted to. So now if you wanted to make your own instrument, at that point you could do kind of all of the different instrument design characteristics as well. So, and then, we have lots of people, you could reach out to, I think there's a part on the Steinberg website for people that are selling their own instruments. So if you want to become kind of like a Hallian developer, there's great stories, like Chris St. Aubin, who's, he did an amazing instrument called Simple, a very powerful, simple synthesizer, and he's, a lot of people know him from being on Facebook on Cubase users, and he's selling that through Steinberg. Danny Lux, who's a very prominent television composer in the United States. He also, made his own instrument so he could have access to sounds, and, he's selling those as well. So you could sell them kind of through the, like Hallian marketplace and be able to, realize revenue through it. So it's a great way for people to work with, different samples and be able to make money with instruments you've created. All right, so we see, let's see if I can, Ma'in Hijazin, sorry if I mispronounced that. It says first time hangout. It's great. Okay. Okay, so Steve, first time looking in. All right, so we just see a question. Can you talk about Cubase plugins in brief? I'm not sure. I think I asked a little earlier, but maybe if you wanted to, if there's particular plugins that you're looking for, 'cause when you look at Cubase plugins, there's probably 50 or so plugins that come with the program. They will be, as we wanted to come over here, they'll be categorized. So if you want to have delay plugins, different distortion, dynamics, compressors, you have EQs and filters, kind of more tools. If you want to have tuners, SMPTE timecode generator, test generator, surround. If you wanted to do stereo enhancements, make your mix sound wider, different reverb plugins, pitch shift, network plugins, modulation for like chorusing, flanging, mastering, so dithering, filters. You could have external plugins. There's a whole suite of different plugins, but maybe if you have a specific question, I'd be happy to kind of go over that with you. Okay, so a question from Pete. Greg, is there a simple way to lock single MIDI notes to exclude them from quantize? For example, you need a tight drum track but want some accents in it, kind of freestyle. Thanks. So let me just go to a project maybe that we could do it on some drums real quick. So, and this is a great thing that I've always liked to do, is kind of like more selective quantization. So I'll open this up and I'll just kind of drag a pattern over. And let me just copy that pattern. So I'm just going to have this particular pattern here. I'm going to glue them all together quickly just by holding down my Alt or Option key and gluing. So let's say I have a number of different MIDI events here, and I want to quantize everything except like one particular note. So if I select all the notes, I could hit, Q for quantize, and that will kind of shift the notes based on the current quantized value. So here, we could say it's going to be, so we could do that based on the current quantization value. So let's say if I want this to be set to, let's do quarter notes here. So, if we do this now, when I hit Q, But again, you want to maybe selectively, do everything here. So let's say I wanted everything except for my kick to be quantized. So if you just go to like the first event and double click while holding down the shift key, that will select everything. That will select all the kicks. Then you can go to edit, and under select, you'll see invert. So now you can quantize everything except your kicks. So as we do that, and I'll undo that, and you'll see all the notes probably shift a little bit except for the kicks. So again, just shift double click from the first note, and at that point, go to edit to select and invert, and then quantize. So that will take what was selected, unselect, and select what was unselected. So hit Q, and at that point, that way you could only have certain things like freely done. All right, so here's probably the hammering in the background. I apologize for that. So let me know if that works for you, but that's kind of a great way to do it. And I know some people do drum fill, like have a drum loop and they'll manually play in drum fills with kind of like a more, not with a very strict time, but very alive thing just to kind of change the feel. So, okay. Thanks. All right, so let's move on. See, nice comment from Tim Weinheimer. Always something to learn with Cubase Hangouts. That's great. That's why we do them. Okay, so see this question I asked earlier for just like a little bit of a clarification. So is there a way to set up 2 analog modules in mid-side configuration? I've heard people do it before, but can't figure out how. So, if it's for like an audio event, so let me just close this out. So if I have some audio events, generally if you want to do like mid-side, you have like one mic as figure 8 and one kind of dead on. And then what you need to do is, reverse the polarity of one of the mics that's in figure 8. So if you come over here to reverse the polarity, just kind of come right there and you could just flip the phase when needed. But I'm not sure if it's when you say analog modules, if it's, dealing with audio tracks or tone modules like synthesizers. So maybe if you could specify that, might be able to help you a little more. All right, so we see Cubase EQ, pre or post my insert EQ. So when you come here, we could, just kind of change these, so as we see this, we're going to see the inserts here, and this kind of goes directly into the signal flow that we see here. So we see inserts, channel strip, and the channel strip includes the Cubase EQ and our sends. Now, if I wanted to change the signal flow order to have like the inserts before the sends, all you have to do is you click here, and there's just this little tiny icon that will allow you to say, okay, I want the strip to come before the inserts in the signal flow, or I want the inserts to come before the channel strip. So by default, it's generally the inserts before the channel strip, but if you need it otherwise, just click on that little button there, and then you could alter and change and modify this signal flow between the inserts and the channel strip, and the channel strip does contain this particular channel EQ right there. Okay, so we have a question. Can we make, sorry, my timeline just jumped on me. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, question. Can we make multiple mixes on the same project and change them? All right, it's a great question. So let's come over here. I'll just jump back. So if you want to do this, it's best to do it before you do a lot of channel automation. So this is one method to do it if you don't have channel automation. So if you're kind of building up your mix and you want everything and you want to have like maybe different starting off points. Okay, so as we come here, let's say I have my mix. So say I want to take my drums. I want all these to be maybe a little louder so I can enable my quick link. Okay, so say I want this, and so say I want my guitar set up. So right here we can take a snapshot. So say I want to take another mix. A lot of times you may just build up a mix from scratch. So let's say I just, I thought it was pretty good, but sometimes, you get better results once you have everything built up. Just kind of saying, okay, let's just build it up again. All right, and let's say, okay, let's adjust like the panning and a hi-hat here a little bit. All right, so we'll build up our toms. And let's say we'll just have our overheads, and let's pan the overheads. All right, so now I bring in the bass. So say we want to do like a real bass heavy mix, take a snapshot, and let's say, okay, I know they're going to complain about the bass, so I'll take a snapshot again. And now at this point, you could just say, let's get to snapshot 1. And let's go to snapshot 2. So that's the mix when the bass player's in the room, maybe. And this is maybe the mix you want. Now, where it gets really interesting is if we get into all of our EQs and effects, we could actually come over here and you could say, okay, on my selected channels, I want to recall the volumes from snapshot 1, the EQs from snapshot 3, and the insert effects from snapshot 2 on selected channels. So you can mix and match different components within the mixed console snapshots. So experiment with that, and that's a great way of working to, be able to quickly change, especially if you have a client that, changes their mind constantly. Just take a quick snapshot and you'll be all set to quickly go back when you think it's right and the client changes their mind and the client goes, yeah, go back to do what you did an hour ago. Right? Oh, thanks. So instead of having to do a save as, try working with your mixed console snapshots. Okay, so we have a question. Explain analog to use as a VST plugin. So if you have an analog processor, let's say like a favorite compressor or EQ that you want to utilize inside of your Cubase project. So what you could do is go to your audio connections menu. We will come right over here to external effects, and we could say, okay, let's add an external effects. And so let's say I have a DBX compressor. So I could say this is going in and out of my audio interface. So we want to basically have an audio interface that has enough inputs and outputs to work with all of our outboard gear. So we say it's going, the signal is going out of this output and it's coming back into this input of my audio interface. Now, generally, depending on the processor, as you go out into the real world and back, It may not work so well with plugin delay compensation. So, and it could change depending upon the project every single time. So here, when I go to my inserts and I want to utilize my DBX compressor, I would just say, okay, I want my DBX compressor there. You could set the amount of gain, going out or the gain coming back. So if you need to alter that, you can. But the important thing is this little ping button. So once you come here, you could just ping the system. And what that'll do is measure the latency of that path in the current project. And that will compensate for the latency for the outboard gear. So once you ping the system, that figures out the path, the length, and time of that signal path, and will automatically do delay compensation for you. So your outboard gear can be utilized directly within your VST software-based mixer. Okay, question. Can we merge projects? So if we wanted to merge a project with this, there's a couple of different ways. One is you could drag, you can have multiple projects open in Cubase and you can drag and drop audio from one project to another. But you could also go to import tracks from project. So let's say I wanted to import tracks from this particular project. I'll come right over here and say open. So I say, okay, I want to select all of my files here. And at this point, we could, what type of data we want, if we want the events and data, or if I just want like all these settings. So let's say I have a perfect mix set up with all my plugins. I could import all the tracks without events and parts. We could choose the destination if we wanted to be routed to a particular track. We could also, not have the channel and inspector settings. So if we don't want the EQs and channel strip, or we don't want the automation. So at this point, I will just say okay. And now I have kind of project one at top, and we also have options where it's inserted at the original time position, at the cursor. And then I have my second project. So that's kind of an easy way to merge projects. Just go to File, to Import Tracks from Project, choose your project, and then you could just kind of go through those steps. Okay. Just see a comment from Ted Springman. Thrilled to hear from Tuesday's Hangout. You could run audio through Retrolog, just like a mini Moog, to get that great filter effect. Yeah, it's a great feature. So you could just sidechain directly in. Okay. Hi, Greg. After tempo detecting, this is from John Costigan. Good to see you on the Hangout, John. Hi, Greg. After tempo detecting and setting tempo from definition in a WAV file, I can't get the MIDI tracks in the project to play at the project tempo. I think this is a user goof. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a scenario of that. Okay, so let's say I'm going to do a tempo detection on this audio file. So if you haven't seen this before, you could come over here. And we had a question last time about the click track sound not sticking. So it's, since I've been using it, the click track is kind of stuck. I'm going to change the sound back. So that seems to be retaining through different projects until I actually change it. So I can go back to our click so we could hear it a little easier. Okay, so I want to So just use the Steinberg default click sound. Okay, so now there's no correlation if you haven't seen this before. We could do this with audio or MIDI. Okay, so there's no tempo with that. So I'm going to just add a quick instrument track. We'll do something from my Groove Agent SE. I would say I'll define maybe a Simon Phillips jazz kit. So I'll come here. We'll just see how this sounds. So say, you know, my jazz kit here is playing along to the tempo of the sequence. All right, so what I want to do, but we don't know what the tempo is of the audio file itself. So I'm going to take this, select this, do a, I'm going to do a tempo detection of the file. All right, so Cubase has done a tempo analysis of the audio file. So I'm going to determine where the downbeat is of the song. So it looks like it's right there. Sounds like we're in 4/4 meter. So I will just come and not place it there. Sorry about that. So let's say at this downbeat. So if you have the particular file here, you know, sometimes if you wanted this to conform to the tempo itself, I could, you know, take now if I wanted to drag, let's say, a pattern over, and I wanted this pattern to automatically follow. So say we'll just, so I could take this pattern here. Let me just find something that's maybe not so bop-ish. Okay, so I'm just going to drag this particular MIDI pattern over. Let's say to Groove Agent here. So bear with me just for a second. Okay. So I'm just going to make sure my snap is on. So now that we've done this, we could have this pattern automatically kind of follow the tempo of the music of the audio file. So those will kind of automatically follow. Now, if you wanted the, let's say if I had a tempo set of, you know, perfectly set to 120 beats a minute. But this audio isn't following the MIDI, and they're kind of out of sync. So if you want the MIDI to follow the audio, you don't have to do this next step. But if you want the audio that's changing in time to follow, we would select the audio event, go to audio to advanced, and now we say set definition from tempo. So we could just save that in the project file. So now, even though this original jazz piece was playing back at varying tempos, it's now going to automatically just follow the tempo that is entered in here. So let's say my tempo is 120 beats a minute. Now, this is now slowing down. So say I'll do 88. And that's all you have to do. So if you want the audio, once you've done that, once you've done the tempo detection, the MIDI can automatically follow the audio. But if you want the audio to comply to different tempos, that's when you need to utilize, select the event, and from audio choose advanced, and go to set definition from tempo. And that way this can follow, an audio file that has varying tempo changes can follow any file of your MIDI. So hopefully that makes sense, John. If not, just let me know. Okay, so we say, I just see a question, and room EQ acoustics. Let me see if this is maybe a follow-up. Okay. Okay, and room EQ acoustics on VST, please explain. So if you have, if you wanted to apply, room EQ settings, so I'm not sure if this is for like something like a SonarWorks type of, room correction process. If you have something like SonarWorks and you have Cubase Pro, I would put these, if you're trying to correct like acoustic anomalies in your room through like a software plugin, I would go to the control room and click on inserts. And for your particular, when you go to your main section, you could now come over here and just choose to have, your inserts and put your room correction EQ there. That way, everything that you're going, your monitoring environment is going through there, but the room EQ acoustics aren't necessarily going to be rendered within the audio file. So if I put a room correction plugin on the inserts, when you go to export, unless you disable that, at that point it is going to, apply the room correction, which is supposed to make your mix sound correct. It's going to apply that so that all those settings that were the deficiencies of your monitoring environment have now been embedded into the file. But if you're doing a room correction EQ, just come over here and go to the control room, click on inserts, and for your monitors, insert the room correction there. But if I'm misunderstanding, please let me know. Okay, so I see a question from Matthias. Greg, can you please tell me some techniques to make piano track sounds big and not so flat? Okay. So let's take a track. Let me see. I may have one has, I think, some real piano. A track from my friend Clay Ostwald, who's an amazing pianist, producer, amazing musician, producer, engineer, amazing person. But we'll go ahead and take a look. So, and he did kind of an interesting technique in this project. I think he had a Yamaha C7 in his studio at the time that he was using. And, sometimes having a great piano helps. Having it in tune is always helpful as well. But let's go ahead and take a look. And Clay did kind of an interesting technique I haven't really seen so much. Let me just find the piano track here. All right, let me just do a quick search. Okay, so he did. So we'll listen to it and we'll take a look at what Clay's done. So what he's done is a kind of a left-right piano sound. So we see kind of like a stereo piano. And it looks like that he just did kind of, something that was also just kind of pan, dead center. So let's see what it sounds like just kind of in context. We'll listen to it just kind of with the piano by itself here. We'll turn it up just a little bit. So I'll go ahead and just unsolo. So that's kind of just the stereo piano part. And just with a separate kind of mono mic. Kind of in context of a mix. And then just the piano soloed. Let's go ahead and mute just the mid piano. So this gives a little more bite. And no EQ. And let's say if we're kind of working with a sampled piano, I think we have another project we'll play from Clay here. Where it's going to be using a MIDI piano part. Okay, here we go.
Que no se tiene piedad, ni aunque se la entregue. Ahora fíjate si puedes en lo que va a pasar cuando cambie este lente. Lo que nos dividía desaparecerá, pues lo que se ve por el
So we have piano part coming here.
Hay que sincerarse y hay que amar.
So and this is just using the grand. So it's again kind of using the same type of piano that he uses in his project, but So we'll go ahead and unsolo this quickly.
Esta es tu jada, sin vida no nos queda nada. Dime cuál es tu prioridad. Mi amor en cristal, porque así nos vemos todos ante el que hace el juicio final.
So the piano will come in.
Nuestras almas no tienen. Somos iguales, marchando al ritmo de un tambor.
But if I wanted to also just come here to the piano itself and like in the grand, you'll have some different choices where you could go to the EQ. But one of the great things is the control. So if I wanted this piano to be brighter, or more mellow. So how the velocity curve can work as well. And again, kind of in context. So, having the controller and being able to kind of make sure that that's kind of matched to the piano sample. If it's going to be MIDI based, make sure that you don't have any phase problems if you're doing like a stereo miking set. And sometimes, there's a tendency to everyone wanting to have everything sound big and fat in a mix. And, they want a big fat bass, they want a big fat drums, they want a big fat piano, they want a big fat guitar, a big fat vocal. And if you try sometimes to always go for the big and fat, it all kind of fights against itself and everything starts to sound a bit small and narrow. So sometimes, just like the arrangement can make a big difference. But obviously, like the different piano samples, the grand is really great. It's a, phenomenal piano sample that just kind of sits really well in a mix as well. So, but, try not to use too much EQ, try to, the chord voicings. One thing I always tell people is like, a really good arrangement will make the mix easier. So if the piano is fighting with the guitars, if the piano is fighting on a low end with the bass, those things will kind of fight against you. So some things to be aware of. So hopefully it makes sense. But give some of those suggestions a try. Okay. Okay, so question, how can I connect my synth hardware and record its own sounds as MIDI, please? So, all you have to do is, have connected to a MIDI interface. If you have if it's a USB interface, you could do that. If there's a USB connection on the keyboard, which most keyboards made in the last 10 to 15 years tend to have, you could do that. And all you have to do is, add a MIDI track. All right. And at this point, when you go to add a MIDI track, you want to set your MIDI channel. You want to be able to set what port it's actually being sent to or connected to. And at this point, you could just say, like, it's connected out of my Panorama, my Nectar Panorama MIDI interface. And my MIDI information will be sent directly, will be captured from that instrument. And the MIDI information is sent directly to that instrument and it will generate the tones. And you may need to, if you have a mixer in your studio, take the audio out of the tone generator and feed it into the mixer. If you have audio inputs on your audio interface, you could also, again, just like we talked about going into your external effects, you could have an external instrument. So at this point, you can say, okay, I have a montage. I can add an instrument track. And I would need to connect the audio outputs of the synthesizer into audio inputs of my mix console. I would say, okay, I want to use my montage at this point. I add that as a instrument track, and we could come directly over here and I could adjust my EQ and effects, everything based, the same EQ and effects I use for my audio, I could use for my virtual instrument if needed. So, but just add a MIDI track unless you have it connected as an external instrument. Set the right input and output and MIDI channel, and then just hit record. That's all you had to do. If you want the audio of the instrument to be incorporated into your VST environment in Cubase Pro, go to your audio connections and add it as an external instrument, define which inputs it's connected to, and add a VST instrument, and under external instrument, you could see it and you can name it appropriately. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from Jeff. Hi, Greg, and thanks. Is there a way to select dozens of slices or ranges and give them all markers at the respective beginning to edit in the markers window? So we may be able to do this through a quick macro. So I will come over here. Let's just go to okay. So let's say if I'm here, let's add a marker track. So let's say if I have like my drum loop here, so if that's selected, I think I could just hit find my right modifier key here. All right, so I'm just hitting Alt or Option plus N or B. So if you wanted to do it to particular slices, at this point you could set up like a key command just to insert markers if you wanted to. So on a PC, it's going to be insert, but there's no insert key on a Mac. So let's say if I want to have my sustain, so at this point I'm going to hit, like if I wanted to do by like almost like by transient or by hit point, at this point we'll just select this particular file and I'll say Alt N. Sorry, wrong modifier key. Make sure my keyboard is. All right, I'm just going to revert this quickly. All right, so let's say so I'm just trying to get my keyboard shortcuts here. Just try a new project. Okay, so now I could just kind of tab. I'm hitting Alt N to go to the next slice point. Or if I just hit N, it will go to the next event. So let's say if I want to copy this a couple times. There's no, I don't think I don't know of a way to say, take these multiple selected events and turn that into, multiple markers. But I think we could come over here and let's say if I just do like Alt N. So I have all of these selected and I could do Alt or Option B to go back. And if I just hit N, we could place markers at the beginning. So if I wanted to incorporate this to drop drop markers at those particular points, I'll add a marker track. Okay, and now I'm going to make a macro. So I'll go to my key commands. Let's go to new, and I'll say add marker. Let's say at event. So I'm going to come here and just say N. So I'm going to add that. And now I'm just going to say let's add that command. So now I could come over here, go to under edit macros, and let's say add marker, add event. And you could set up a keyboard shortcut for this. So it'll now, okay. So at this point, I would probably need to go. Okay, so I'm going to modify my macro here. Give me just a second. So we're going to say navigate up. Okay, so as we do this, let's say our very first one. So, but if you just, even if you assign just a quick keyboard shortcut, I could play around with. Let me just change the order of that and maybe able to get this sorted out. But you could do it by just, doing different events or, navigating quickly and being able to add that. So let's move that down. So now as we run this macro, and I could just do this for selected events quickly. Let me add a key command for this. So at this point, you could modify the macro a bit. So you could drop markers in, kind of just that easily. So as you wanted to, let's say we don't have these markers, so it's not going to, do multiple events, but you could come here and just put markers in. And if you wanted that to do, hit points as well, you could just change the one function to do that. So I know it's not like, okay, I just want it at the beginning of these events, or, and you might be able to, let's see if there's, you might be able to navigate to next selected event. So you might have to do it a little bit more manually, but, if you just hold down the macro as you do that to kind of start with, like I could just hold that function down. Let's say if I start my play position here, let's say I'll just have this track selected. So, but you could try out some of those different things with different macros to kind of easily put that in. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, I see Michael Teams wants everyone to get started hitting the like button and subscribe. I'll concur with that. All right, good to see Gareth on the Hangout. Okay, so I see Gareth mentioning hopefully be here if there's a Hangout on Tuesday. So Tuesday I'm going to be stuck in some meetings at work, so we won't be able to do the Hangout Tuesday, but next Friday. And I see that Gareth is watching from a train, first time watching on a train. Okay, so I see questions sent to Club Cubase earlier. Should I repost here regarding EQ RTA? So I don't remember that question, but Evinger, go ahead and repost it. All right. Okay, so I just see from Mima Pro Africa, my VST Connect Pro won't connect me with the performer. Why is that? So, generally you want to make sure that the performer, is, so I'm not sure. Let's say I don't have my other laptop set up, but, if you look at this, you could see, make sure, that you find the performer here. And make sure that your performer ideally is going to be wanting to use a wired connection for their connection. So if they're doing wireless, that the rates can fluctuate quite a bit. So make sure that they're on a wired connection, and that should help quite a bit. Okay. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Any idea how to synchronize the pre-delay of the reverbs of my template with the tempo of the song? I know about the delay before, but I'm not convinced. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at like a pre-delay setting. So okay, so just come over here. Let's add an effects channel track. Okay, so let's just say Okay, so what you might have to do if you wanted to synchronize, try to see if there is a way to see the pre-delay time. So if you wanted to see kind of what the pre-delay time is for the reverbs, you may be able to come over here, let's say to, let's go to maybe an actual delay plugin. So let's say our tempo is, we'll do something a bit atypical. So let's say we're at 87. So say 87 BPM. Okay, so it looks like the pre-delay is just expressed in milliseconds, which is how a lot of reverbs are. But if you wanted it to be on a quarter note, try coming over here, let's say to your mono delay, and say quarter. And then deactivate sync. So let's say that would be 50 milliseconds, and just put this value. So if you want a one beat, you could just do it kind of. So that would give you a quarter note pre-delay. But I don't know of a way to actually see this in a tempo synced value. But you could determine the time here in a quick delay plugin just by turning the sync on and off. So if we say, okay, I wanted a dot at quarter note, you could come over here and just say, or a quarter note triplet, come right over here. Now it looks like it's going to be kind of the same value. So it looks like 50 milliseconds, but if we come over here and adjust kind of visually, so let's say come here to like eighth note triplets. So you could kind of determine, there may be a better way of determining kind of delay time in milliseconds, but you could kind of use an tempo based delay plugin that could probably give you more of the value. So if you kind of toggle back and forth so that they're close, you could do that. All right, so just see a question, grace period on new VST Connect Pro 5. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll see if I could do a quick search and see if I can find it really quick. Bear with me just a second. All right, let me see if I can dig through an email quickly and find that. Bear with me. Sorry about construction vehicles outside my window here. All right, so I think I found a document. Let's see if there's... All right, just reading through quickly. All right, just Seeing if usually there's one document, it might have the grace period. I don't see a grace period indicated on my document, but I'll take a quick look and see if I could find that out. If you want to email me at clubcubase at steinberg.de, I'd be happy to. I'll just look one more quick place. And see if... Yeah, I don't see kind of a grace period indication in some of my documents, but I'll send a quick email over and see if I could find out an answer for you. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so I just see, hi Greg, what is the main difference between a MIDI track and an instrument track in Cubase? So when we use MIDI tracks can go to external instruments. So if you have, like a Yamaha motif or a montage or, and you wanted to record that as MIDI from an external device, you could, just use that. Instrument tracks are set up for software instruments or instruments that have been set up as an external instrument. So those are kind of the main distinctions between them. So. Okay, so I just see question, 64-bit float mixing printing, cannot open stereo file on Pro Tools. Probably Pro Tools doesn't support that higher resolution. So it's not necessarily, if you wanted to go to Pro Tools, it's not necessarily our fault that they don't support kind of, higher resolution files. So it's just a limitation of the Pro Tools. So I believe. So I don't think, that's understandable that it may not do that. So you may want to do it as like a 32-bit floating file because I don't even think it'll do a 32-bit integer yet. So, so it's one of the kind of advantages of Cubase is that you could work with higher resolution files. Okay, question, does Cubase version 5 for Windows include any version of Groove Agent? I think that had the precursor to the Groove Agent SE, maybe Groove Agent 1 that came with Cubase 5. But if you have Cubase 5, definitely make sure that you upgrade to later versions because it's probably 12, 13 years old now. So make sure you do that. Okay. Right, and just seeing other comments that about Pro Tools only supporting 32-bit, which is kind of what I thought. Okay, so we have a question: if you could explain equalizer, Y and Y axis. Sorry, my timeline just jumped on me. Let me just sneak back. So I have lots of questions in my future. Okay, so I think I'm back in the same ballpark where I was before. Okay, so question. If you could explain equalizer, Y and Y-axis dB gain range from plus 24 until minus 24, why is this range? Why is it not from plus 60 to minus 60? So generally EQs, like, you may have a mic pre that does, that may be able to do like 60 dB. But, generally EQs don't go that high. So, if I want to come here, so, 24 dB is, quite a bit of gain reduction. So let's say, if I wanted to, reduce the track volume, let's say if I take this particular track and get my keyboard on the right computer. So let's say I'll just kind of play this particular track. So let's say if I wanted to reduce that by 24 dB, all right, so say I want to take this track down by 24 dB. I could just go to the fader here and say minus 24. So that's a pretty drastic change in volume. So EQs generally don't go, 60 dB of gain or cut. So mic pre's, you often hear that's a typical amount of gain for a mic preamplifier. So, generally EQs are going to be about, 24 dB. That's pretty typical. If we wanted to, come to, let's say our low shelf EQ, we could also kind of set, and maybe some like extreme settings, let's say if we go to frequency EQ where, it could be that, let's see if we come here. So we have 12 dB, but you have 48 dB, and that's considered a pretty extreme amount of cut for like a low cut, high cut filter. But generally EQs don't go 60 dB. And if you have to EQ something by 60 dB, there's probably something else that's, wrong with the track. So, all right, my timeline jumped on me again. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead. Right, reading through comments. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Can you explain about VST Connect? So what VST Connect is going to allow you to do is a user, it's going to allow you to remotely record someone who's in a different location. So Cubase will come with VST Connect SE, and there's a VST Connect Pro. So VST Connect Pro will allow you to do up to 16 tracks. It'll allow you to synchronize video that was just released yesterday with the VST Connect Pro 5. But what it's going to allow you to do is someone could download for Mac or PC at no charge a VST Connect Performer software. And then they're going to have to, or for iOS, I think it's $5. And what you would do is come right over here and you say, okay, I'll just do perhaps a new project here quickly. And we'll say create VST Connect. You could actually see them kind of on a webcam. So you would look for that particular person, and what you could do is, send a headphone mix or Q mix from that person directly from your Cubase session. They'll hear it in time with their latency, and so they could record. Then that signal is going to come back directly into your Cubase system so that you could record them remotely. So and one kind of great story, VST Connect kind of during the pandemic has obviously been incredibly popular. And if you ever in the United States, we have like kind of a singing show, a talent show called The Voice, and they actually did the entire season this last summer, entirely using VST Connect, or they wouldn't have been able to do the show without it. So it's kind of a good VST Connect story. So it's basically going to allow you to do remote recording of people not resident in your facility. Okay. All right. So I see a comment from Mr. Ed. Ooh, thank you, Greg, from left to right, pre or post EQ. I'm welcome to Vienna. So if I go to Vienna, I'll let you know. So always wanted to go there. Big classical music guy. So it's kind of the whole scene back then with the Habsburg dynasty. All right. All right, so just see comments, and the snapshots are cool. It is a very powerful thing to do. All right, so we have a question, how to cut an audio clip and drag it down in the same location. All right, so there's a couple ways to do that. So one is, let's say if I just want to grab my range selection tool, I'll just add an audio track directly above. I'll activate the project first. That would help. So I'm going to add an audio track below. All right, so if I just wanted to cut like a range of it, I could use the range tool. And then I'm just going to hold down my Alt key. And I moved it down first in time. So now I could just, if you hold down just kind of like your Alt key. So select, like if you want to just select a range and then hold down your Alt key, you could just do it like that. If you wanted to move the entire event and make a copy, let's say, let's say if I have my snap disabled. Okay, it was. All right, so let's say if I moved this event here, and let's say I moved it in time accidentally. So, and I hold down my Alt key, and then if I hold down, my Control key. So let's say I hold down my Alt key to copy. Okay, but now since I moved it down first, I could hit the Control or Command key, and that will restrain the direction of my edit. So if I come here and I want to copy this range that I selected, so select it with the range tool, hold down Alt or Option, and I can make a copy. Now if I moved it upward vertically first, and then hit the Control key, now I can't adjust its position in time. If I have moved this horizontally first and hold down my Alt key to make a copy, I can't, and hold down Control or Command, I can't move it to a different track. So you could constrain the direction by holding down the Control key. So if I come here, you could also, if I just wanted to move it, just hold down the Control key, and I can't move it in time just that easily. So Control or Command. If I wanted to make a copy, hold down Alt, and then if I moved it vertically first, hit Control or Command, and now I can't move it in time, but I could only move it to different tracks. So just hold down the Control key, and that'll be the modifier so that parts won't move in the opposite direction. That will be your constraint delay, your constraint to time. Okay, so question, does Cubase Artist have VCA faders? I believe that's just going to be a Cubase Pro feature with the VCA faders. And it's from Dina, and also indicating first timer here and loving it. That's great. Welcome. Please ask any question that you have, Okay. Okay, so we see Steve has to head off. Thanks for the info. All right. Thanks for joining us. All right. And, okay. Okay, so I see from Steve Kirby, brilliant answer. Thank you. I wish I knew what it was for, but I'm glad that you like the answer. All right, so we see sub 403 on a Hangout. Okay. Also seeing, thanks, Greg, for explaining external effects. Okay, that's good. And our comment, Greg, always gets me in a creative mood. That's all right. It's good to hear. We want you to realize your creativity at Steinberg. That's our kind of our corporate slogan. So it's a good one. Okay. Okay, so I see a question from Ted Springman. How to restrict hit point detection to a range without affecting time before or after? So let's say if I come here, we see our hit points. So let's say if I just select a range and hit Shift X, so I can see hit points there. So kind of the hit points will, are kind of always going to be present. There is kind of a preference, so, as Cubase records, it's going to put the hit points on the files, but you could also, I think as a preference, have it be done manually. So let's take a look, see if I could find a preference quickly. So let's say editing audio. It might be under record. I think this might be a preference. Let me see. Okay, so if you record and it's under editing audio, you'll see this choice for enable automatic hit point detection. So unless, so if that is unchecked, so as the file is recorded, it won't automatically do the hit point detection. So at that point, what you could do is just say, okay, I just want this part of the audio file to have hit points. I could just do Shift X and I could search for hit points on this part versus what came before or after. So I think that'll work for you, Ted, but if I'm misunderstanding, please let me know. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to toggle between two different inserts, i.e. compare two different compressors without having to turn one off, other one, vice versa? So let's say if I wanted to come here, let's get to our inserts. So I think a lot of the plugins will have like an A/B setting. So if it's the same plugin, you can come here. All right, so let's say I had these settings for all right, so let's say if it's the same plugin, I could say, okay, we have this, and you see this little drop-down menu. then you could say, and you've done everything. And it's like, okay, I'm a genius. Let me just check. And then you can say copy A to B. And then you could, so let's say switch to B setting and come here. And then you could just kind of toggle between different settings within the same actual plugin. So you could kind of go between A and B. If you wanted to, let's say on your mix console, another way that you could do it is, let's say if I'm here and I have my inserts, is you could actually take snapshots. So if I wanted to see this compressor, take a snapshot, and you could choose to have this snapshot for the selected channel only. So let's say if I do that, and let's say I change from compressor to vintage compressor. All right, take a snapshot, and then you could just come right over here, and you can turn this window off and switch between your different snapshots here. So you could just say, oh, let's recall this snapshot. So that's my compressor. I want to go to snapshot 3. Let's say, or snapshot 2. There's my vintage compressor. There's my compressor. Which one do you like? And you could turn off the little window in the middle. So if you want to do it toggling between the plugin, use the A to B. If you wanted to toggle between different plugins, just use snapshots. I see other people that will duplicate the track and just kind of mute, unmute. That's another method that people would use, kind of pre-snapshot. Okay, so we have a question: how do you warp audio to tempo in Cubase? So let's say I'll just do a new project. Kind of the term warp has many connotations to, especially coming from different programs. So let's say my tempo is set to 108 beats a minute, and I have a drum loop. Okay, I'm going to type in 108 instead of 360. All right, so now as I drag and drop an audio file in, if I wanted to have this kind of playback at its original tempo, I'll turn on my click track. We can see that this isn't following the tempo. I'll just turn off my loop. So we can see that the tempo and what's going on with the particular file aren't in time. Now, if this audio file has tempo information in it, I could have it selected and just put it into musical mode. So now that will automatically, I'll just put this onto the grid. Sorry about that. All right. So now when I play this, that's automatically locked to the tempo. So if we wanted to, just placing it in musical mode, we could do that directly from the info line or from your pool window. So, we could enable musical mode in either location. So if the audio had varying tempo, so let's say if I come over here and I add a tempo track, and let's say at this point I have my tempo track enabled and I just wanted to draw in different retards and the accelerando. So as we play back, So let's say we have something like this. So it's going to speed up and slow down. So if it was varying in tempo, what you could do is select the file and kind of like we showed earlier, go to the project menu and choose to do a tempo detection. So go to project to tempo detection. And then once you have the tempo figured out, let's say this is our tempo detection that's occurred, we could go to audio to advanced and choose set definition from tempo. So if you have audio that's now has multiple tempo changes in it, once it's set to set definition from tempo, and then that will place that into musical mode, that will automatically follow the tempo. So depending on what audio warp is, what your definition is, that's how you could warp audio to do that, to tempo. All right, good to see Robbie Bowling on a Hangout from Dallas. All right, so seeing another suggestion on like a piano part, and you could see kind of like in the suggestion was kind of using the mid-side EQ option. In like as my friend Clay may have noticed that he did like that mono file, but if you wanted to use like, a mid-side EQ, one that's very popular for that, and especially if you're doing EQ on pianos, is if you used a frequency EQ. So let's say, sometimes miking, it's not that EQ plugin. Sorry about that. EQing piano sometimes can be a little tricky. So a lot of EQs that come over here and you could adjust the frequencies or cut. But you may want to, let's say, come over here and let's say you have a stereo mic. You may want to EQ the left channel differently than the right channel with different cues and different frequencies. So the frequency EQ, we could come over here and be able to do those independently. If I wanted to have also kind of a mid-side EQ, I could I could apply EQ to the middle part of the panning spectrum independently than the outer edges, like the side. So if this was left, center, right, if we could just use that just visually, here I could apply this EQ to like the sides and this EQ to like the middle part of the panning spectrum. And that's also very good for EQ on piano. Okay, so I just see from Taylor, failed VST Connect session. Performer couldn't install VST Connect Performer, asked for his e-licenser number, was unable to install without it. Why? So the VST Connect Performer doesn't use the e-licenser at all, so he may have just been installing the VST Connect Pro or VST Connect SE. But I don't know if you have a way of maybe using TeamViewer where you could actually see the person set up, but the VST Connect Performer doesn't utilize the e-licenser technology at all. So he probably was installing the wrong program if it was asking for his e-licenser. Okay, let's just see a question. Hello there. Anyone having trouble closing projects properly? On large projects with loads of sample, for example, almost every time I close a project, it freezes and I need to force quit. Thank you. So a lot of times when you're working on large projects and it's not closing, it's a plugin that's not releasing its samples or not releasing its memory. So you will probably, and sometimes it sucks to go through the process, but you could probably find, try a project with, and try adding different plugins and in combination, and you could see, and probably pretty quickly, and it's going to be You know, generally I haven't seen it with any of the Steinberg plugins, but you'll be able to kind of find a plugin that's not releasing its memory. So, okay. So we just see kind of question from sub 403. I think this is in jest. Any word when Cubase 40 is going to drop? I think it's going to be 2000. Let's see, 2040, maybe 2041. So we'll see how it goes if it's on schedule. But probably the Germans have a plan for it already. So, all right. Okay, let's see. Lots of anticipations. Okay, so we have, please, how can I get a vocoder sound in Cubase? So Cubase doesn't include a vocoder. So if you're looking for like a true vocoder, there's a number of shareware vocoders. But Cubase itself doesn't have a vocoder. Sometimes people will use some of the different plugins for kind of vocoding effects. But if you're looking for an actual vocoder that's going to, play back from a synthesizer, Cubase doesn't come with a vocoder, but there's, tons of, freeware, shareware, and third-party vocoder plugins. Okay. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so just reading maybe a question. I see people sometimes have trouble with big projects, so maybe discuss that it's better to have many small projects and just import the rendered audio file from other projects to a mixing project. If you have problems and let's say your computer isn't quite capable of doing a monster project, you can do different rendering options. And let's say if I jump here to a big bold project, but one of the things you could do to free up resources, you could render the files, but, also just coming over here, if you have tracks that are empty, you could just choose to, right click, and then you have options for enabling and disabling tracks. So if I, have a, let's say if I go to, my vocal tracks here, you could just kind of right click, and let me do it for like an instrument track. So let's say, so if I come here and I wanted to, I could just right click and choose to disable tracks. So that will do it, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of allocate resources as well. So. Okay, so to see further follow-up from John Costigan. Hi, Greg. All was as you predicted until I changed the project tempo with or without tempo track. Embedded audio followed. 12 MIDI tracks of drums remained at a static tempo and moved. Okay, so it could be if your MIDI tracks aren't moving, John. Select the track, not the event, but select the track and make sure that all of your MIDI tracks here are set where you see the musical note, that you see like a little quarter note here as opposed to the clock. So try doing that, because otherwise the notes will, if this track is set to clock, as you adjust the tempo, these will stay at the same time position as opposed to the same musical position. So this could stay at 14 seconds and as opposed to measure 3. So check to make sure that your MIDI tracks are actually set to musical mode as opposed to linear mode there. Okay. Just see a comment. The Grand sounds great. It's a phenomenal piano plugin. Okay. See, John Costigan loves that Latin tune. Yeah, that's my friend Clay Ostwald. I think he actually, he lent that to me. It's just a great killer project, amazing grooves. So I think he did that with his friend and partner at the time, Tommy Anthony, who's, he's I think he's singing on it, and he's, the guitarist, kind of the touring guitar player with Santana, has played with, Steve Winwood and Gloria Estefan, a whole bunch of people. So incredibly talented people. Okay, Greg, please explain difference between gain and volume. Gain staging without losing dynamic range, plugin will be better, or how to do it from Cubase. So a lot of times, as we're doing this, let's just jump back maybe to this project. And sometimes, and let me revert it. All right, so let's say we have kind of this, and it's just it's done by my friend Fred Corey, and wonderful producer, arranger, drummer. So we look at this, and sometimes, a lot of people would think initially just kind of, okay, we're going to turn this up. I want all my drums louder, so I'll just put this into Quick Link. And now I just come here. But sometimes as you do this, you could end up kind of fighting yourself. So let's say if I have, all my drums kind of linked here. And let's say we look at my master fader here. So this is where you want like a bit of headroom. Now you could adjust it. So, depending on your mix, if it was too hot, you could just kind of take your master fader down. But, you want to have just a little bit of headroom, because probably when you go into mastering, there's, what a lot of people do initially, and I don't recommend this for a lot of people, but a lot of people have this kind of set up so that every time that they're doing, while they're tracking, everything's going through like a maximizer. Constantly. So yeah, it sounds good and sounds louder. Louder is not always better. But like as you start to do these different aspects, that's going to start, you can hear the dynamics kind of being lost a little bit. So, a lot of where people get a lot of gain and headroom wrong, I think, and what I see in people's projects is, during the tracking process, everything's going through what they think is a mastering chain, and they end up kind of just fighting against each other. So, it's okay just to kind of give yourself that headroom if you're going to take it to the mastering stage, and then kind of treat everything, at kind of the mixed down stereo audio level, because you get kind of, you don't want to necessarily, one analogy I heard from an audio engineer was great. It's like, you can't unburn the steak once it's been burnt, it's going to be burnt. So, make sure that you cook it right. So, make sure that you're not killing all the dynamics. And if you listen to, a lot of older recordings that people cherish, what makes it sound really good is, when it gets to the chorus, there's more information, there's more people singing, there's an extra guitar part, there's clever arrangements to make a piece, naturally get louder and softer. If you listen to Green Day, they're kind of the kings of it, where it's, or Foo Fighters, where, the verse is very kind of settled, and the chorus, just gets more energy, more raucous, and then the verse is very, and it's, the louder part sounds louder because there's a soft part as a contrast between the two. So, think about that in arrangements. And again, I can't say enough that, good arrangements will make, and paying particular attention to your arrangements can make your mixes sound much better. So, all right. Okay, so just see comment, wise words, probably with the piano, fat is not always, fat, F-A-T is not always fat with a P-H-A-T. Okay, so, and I see what program is this. So we're using Cubase 10.5, and I think if it's regarding the piano, which is what your comment was on right before that. So the piano that I used was the Grand, if that was what the question was. Okay. So it's Cubase, and the question, is it better than Pro Tools? And I'll agree with the comment right after is absolutely. But yeah, so you could do, a lot of amazing things in Cubase. So, okay, just see comment. Thanks for answering me. You're welcome. Okay. Okay, so I see lots of people commenting how much they like Cubase over other programs. It's great. Okay, so we have a question. Can I set punch in, punch out points different than cycle boundaries? Example, cycle from bar 1 to 4, but punch in and out at bars 2 and 3. So yeah, we could do that. And this is kind of a technology, something I think this is added in 8 or 8.5. It was just called a punch point. So let's say I have 4 bars here. I will just kind of set up, let's say, a 4-bar range. Okay, so let's say, all right, this is my range that I have, and I'll activate my range. So we'll just have Cubase kind of play back these 4 bars. But say I want to punch in only on this bar. So I'm going to use my range selection tool, and let me change one preference here. I have a preference for my range selection tool under editing. The cycle follows a range selection, so I'll turn that off for this just to make it a little less confusing. Okay, so we have our so I want to punch in, let's say, measure 18 right here, just for one measure. So right there. So I'm going to select this range, and then if we go to your transport and go to punch points, we can say set punch points into selection range. So now I'm going to add an audio track here. Okay. And then, we see that IO is selected. We see these little red events here. So now I play, it's going to cycle, and now it's going to punch in at the punch in point and punch out, play to the end of the cycle range, go back to the beginning of the cycle range, and do take 2, punch in, punch out. And we'll do our third pass. So once again, all you have to do is under transport menu, you'll see punch points, and you could activate them. You can, and those would be independent of the actual cycle markers. So those you could punch in within, a small section of your cycle. So hopefully that solves what you want to do. Just seeing some interesting comments. Sometimes Cubase may be difficult for the users at the beginning because it does so much. I think one of the things that's also great about Cubase is you have the ability to not use features that could be in a way, but when you need the advanced feature, that it's going to be there. It's kind of fascinating watching people that are blind running Cubase. You realize how fast that they are with it. So while Cubase can do everything, it's not always like smacking you in the face and being in your way. Okay. Okay, so I see there's lots of rain. All right. All right, see, nice comment from Dina. Been using Cubase since version 5 and is now hands down the most powerful and intuitive DAW. That's great. Glad you find it that way. Okay, so I just see a comment. I wish they would fix my Camel audio plugins having black interface in Cubase 10.5. So often that's, when there's kind of plugin interface issues, some of them won't really work so well with high DPI stuff, but, we can't really necessarily fix third-party plugins. So you may, if you haven't been in touch with them, that would be a good opportunity to reach out to them. Okay, we see that we have the Discord address from Jazz Dude that Agent K posted with all sorts of great resources. Okay. All right, so this is, I just read, the transmit doesn't work on generic remote. I'm using MIDI controllers, and the MIDI controllers I use works properly on Cubase as input. Okay, so this from G Slow. So it says the transmit doesn't work on generic remote. I'm using MIDI controllers, and the MIDI controllers that I use work properly in Cubase as input. So, I've had the generic remote work great for me. So let's make sure you have it set up correctly. And what the generic remote is, if you're not so familiar with it, is the ability to take a MIDI message. If we go to your studio menu to studio setup, you'll see kind of generic remote. And this would allow you to take a MIDI message and, have that message do a particular function. So let's say I'm doing tons of editing, and I want my sustain pedal to do a function of undo. So let's set that up. So what I want to do is to say this is my correct MIDI input and output for that. And we could think of this as kind of being global settings. And we say, this is the MIDI incoming message, and this is what that message is going to do. So I'm going to hit learn and hit my sustain pedal. So we'll see, this is going to be controller 64. Now, what do I want controller 64 to do? I could come over here, let's say command, let's do edit, and I'll just type in undo here. Okay, and I'm just going to go. So I'm going to choose edit and now undo. All right, so let's say I'm doing, edits all day long. I move this event. Let's say if I come here, I split and I erase, then I could hit my foot switch, hit my foot switch, and that's undo. And I could go through my whole undo history just hitting my foot switch. So let's say I move this event here. I adjusted my volume. I moved all these different events like so. Then I could just hit my sustain pedal and that will undo all the different things. So again, to kind of get this set up, if it's, sometimes making sure that you have the right MIDI in and out port, the right MIDI message, and you could click on learn to capture it. And then make sure that you have the right function. So I know people that have entire MIDI keyboards that aren't used for sounds, but they're just used for functions in Cubase. So Gisa, let me know if that helps. I see a great comment from 518 Studios. Macro is so time saving. Have a Stream Deck that has all my macros on it. And yeah, Stream Decks are great. Okay, and seeing kind of a follow-up, but it doesn't work mutually between MIDI controllers and Cubase, as that's the way it has to. And then further comment on this, MIDI controllers can send signal to Cubase, but Cubase can't send anything to MIDI controllers. Even if I turn on transmit, it's supposed to be I can send MIDI signal either way as far as I know. I've tried several times by various MIDI controller, but it's the same situation. I don't know why it doesn't work properly. So give that a try, but realize that once you do that, that's going to tie up your MIDI message. And once I go here, and let's say I put this into record on this MIDI track, and I'm hitting my sustain pedal now. And let's see if it's captured that. So it's just, but that captured the sustain pedal. So, give that a try, but make sure that you have that configured correctly. Okay. Just reading through comments. All right, so I see from Jeff, who asked a question about markers and macros. Oh man, thanks. I'll study that more. So, yeah, so you'll like it. Okay, so I see a question. Can I ask a question on Groove Agent 5? Is it possible to assign a VST to pad? So I assume, so if you want to put like a VST instrument on a particular pad or a VST effect, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So I have Groove Agent 5 here. So let's say, and this could be handled a little differently if it's a beat agent or an acoustic agent. So let's say I want to take this kick and put a VST instrument on its pad. So as soon as I select it here, I could route this out to, output 2. So let's say I'll turn this on. Let's look at my mix console. So you see everything now is going out to this output here. So as I hit my different sounds, but I will come over here and say output 2. Now we have output 2 being set. We have the rest of the kit going to this output. But this pad is going to this dedicated output. And now if I just want to, go to this output and run, you know, like a different EQ on it. So let's say I wanted to come here and I wanted to put some, you know, like a crazy reverb on it. So let's say I'll just come over here to Revelation. So now as I would play back this, I open up the instrument, I hit this, you know, so that would get its own processing capability and EQs just on this particular instrument. So it's very easy to kind of work with, just being able to have, you know, that instrument all, you know, handled directly with its own dedicated processing if necessary. But if you go into the mixer as well, so Groove Agent itself, one other thing that people miss, you know, and if you go to the mixer, you know, you could have your own set of plugins here. So let's say I wanted to have a delay. So let's say I wanted a multi-delay plugin. I could select that pad. And then when you go to, let's say, the amplifier section, so I have this going out of its own output, but I wanted this sound to have it a delay on it. All right, so let me just make sure it's set up. So let's go to my mixer. So I'll put this on an aux and I'll put a delay. So I hit it once, and then if we wanted to adjust the delay, so let's say I want it to be like, let's say a dotted eighth note delay. So you could have your own kind of independent effects processing internally, or you could have it, you know, routed into your Cubase mixer, especially if you want to use third-party plugins. There's some great choices. All right, so we see the share sing. Hello, Greg Love from India. Today's my birthday. Big fan of yours. Well, happy birthday. Congratulations on your birthday. So have a great day of celebration. Thanks for joining us on a Hangout. Okay, just reading through comments. Okay, so just see when I apply an insert with low cut, the visual display still shows frequency activity below the area I'm filtering. Should I use an EQ as an insert instead? Thanks for all the great tips. So let's go ahead and let's look at, so let's say if I'm here and I just saw the bass here. So I'll just take off my, so say if I just come here. So you can see that it's going to, that as we make changes here, so that looks like it's kind of working as expected here. So let's say if I want to do like a low cut filter. So these, so you can see the change that you have here. So I take the low cut filter away. So it just says, okay, so let's try it with an insert first. So, and it could be depending on your signal flow, but let's say if I do just the EQ here as an insert. So it looks like, you know, so you can see the change here. Let's adjust our output here. So either way, it seems to have a reflection directly on the frequency display on the channel EQ. So, and there could be still signal activity there, even though it's being kind of EQ'd out, but you can see definitely kind of the change. All right, seeing sub 403 coming through with the classic assistant engineer formula of finding your delay times for a pre-delay. So 60,000 divided by the tempo equals a quarter note. It brings back fond memories of when I was a second assistant at Unique Recording in New York. Okay, so question from Jeff Zabelski. What are the uses of the Spectrum Analyzer in Cubase Pro 10.5? So if you wanted to, you know, actually take a look at the frequency spectrum of different parts. So let's say I want to select this guitar, and you can think of it as just kind of a visual reference, a meter. So if we go to our audio, and I will just say, all right, so we'll just choose our spectrum analyzer. So this will kind of show you the frequencies of, you know, different parts. And, you know, a lot of times this could be just more for like a visual reference to see, you know, so you may have like, so let's say if I process this with an EQ, so I'll just hit F7 here quickly. Let's see. And I'm just going to add, let's say, a plug-in EQ. And a lot of people would use it is, let's say you had something that was, let's say, kind of a very narrow Q with lots of gain. Okay, so let's say I process that, and now I look at the spectrum. You know, so this is kind of more of a picture, but here you could see kind of the frequency range. So you can say, oh, 1K, we did this, but let's say I wanted to take the gain down, so 977, and let's go ahead and do the analysis again of that. So now we could see that dip. So if you don't know exactly kind of where the frequency range is, this could help you kind of EQ. And this was kind of what people did before you saw kind of the spectrum displays going on to use as a reference in, you know, from earlier versions. So it can kind of could point out like, you know, the frequency holes or the boot, you know, or the frequency mountains, if you will, as just another way of being able to get a sense of what's going on sonically with the frequencies of your audio. Okay, so it says, hey buddy, I asked last time about the metronome setting, but meant to mention there's a bug when I set it to not play during playback. It resets to default each time I start a new project. So I didn't run into that, and I just kind of turned it off earlier, but let me just, all right. So let's say I have the metronome here. So let's say as we're playing, and I'll change it to a different metronome setup. So go to my click sounds, and let's say I want it to be, let's say tambourine. So now I'll come over here. Okay. So I'm going to turn off my metronome during playback. Okay, I'm going to do a new project. Create empty. And it's still playing back the same metronome sound for me. So let me know if I did something wrong, Steven. But I think I'm kind of doing the same thing you are. All right, just reading through comments. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Okay, so I just see a comment. I want to get the Steinberg UR-RT4 Rupert Neve. I hope that goes on sale on Black Friday. So yeah, I know that there are some Black Friday promotions, but I'm not sure if the hardware is going to be on. So the audio interfaces have been, since pandemic, have been selling like crazy. So. Okay, so I just see from Sasha, hi, great question. My audio quantize does not work in Nuendo. When I put the track in the clip in musical mode, when I press Q or try to quantize it, it doesn't work. What am I doing wrong? So it could be, let's say, I'll just drag, and this will be the same in Cubase or Nuendo. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to take this clip here, and so let's say I just wanted to quantize. So we go to the quantize setup, and you may just have to make sure that the audio warp is enabled. And let's set our quantize value here to 16th notes, and now hit Q, and you could see that that is now. And I'll play this now. If I undo that, you can see kind of different tempo changes, but make sure that you have the audio warp enabled. So if I come here, let's turn off my click. So let's say if I wanted to be more, so I come here, so let's say we put 16th notes. So it doesn't do anything, but make sure you have audio warp enabled. And then if you wanted to add more swing to it, so say 80% swing. But if you undo, So that's just kind of taking the different hit points. So make sure that you have the audio warp within the quantize panel enabled. All right, question. Hi, Greg. Could you please tell me if there's any logic to the chord pad presets? Some of them seem to be organized into groups and chords can be repeated. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the chord pad presets here. So I'll just come over here. So let's go ahead and load up some of the presets. So a lot of these can be for different keys. So let's say I want it to be, key of D major. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. So let me just add a quick instrument track to play it back through. So as soon as all right, Dracula Whirly sounded good for Halloween era in the United States here. But let me just try. All right, so say I will trigger these. Let's see if my MIDI controller, what octave. All right, so that seems sensible for, so it says some seem to be organized in groups and chords can be repeated. So let me just go through a couple more of the presets and see if we can find some. So these are... So I'm just kind of looking at it. I don't see any repeated chords. I mean, sometimes I see like an E minor 7th here, or let's say a D minor 7th. And then you may have, so I think like here we say an F minor 7th and an F major 7th. So do you see like different variations? But maybe if there's a particular preset that you see repeated, and let me know. Okay. Okay, so just see from Mr. Ed. Thank you again, Greg. Again, I'm welcome in Vienna. So it's always... Maybe my next trip to Hamburg, I'll try to sneak off down south to Vienna. Always want to go to Austria. Okay, so it's the Agent K. They're indicating there's lots of questions in my future. That's good. Hopefully we'll have lots of answers. Okay, so question, in what context would you use this solo defeat button? Is that a legacy feature nowadays? Thanks for doing these. As always, it's a pleasure to watch these hangouts. So like, let's say we're playing along. Then I think we do this. Let me just go to something less annoying to listen to. All right, so we'll just jump to this one. So say I could solo.
I'm in the neighborhood. I got some cheap wine. Let's have a
Right, think it's...
But if you're missing me,
Let's see if I can remember the key command.
hit the road.
Okay, so let me just do... All right, so it's just option and command. So
I'm in the neighborhood.
so it allows you to kind of, you know, solo tracks. So say if I always wanted the
I never promised you
vocal,
I'm gonna stick around. But if you're missing me,
so say if I'm here,
I got some cheap wine. Let's have a good time.
and then I just want to solo the guitars or say the drums.
I'm gonna stick around. But if you're missing me, let it be.
So I could hear. So I'll just jump back because I think we switched tracks.
I got some cheap wine.
So that way you could kind of hear the particular track in context as you solo different tracks. So what the solo defeat is, and you can do this by Alt or Option Command on Mac or Alt Control on PC. That will allow you to, you know, not have that track follow solos. So a lot of people have kind of learned, you know, on consoles to mix that way, but it's still like, you know, if you always want something going on and you're soloing other tracks to see if it's conflicting. Like, you know, like these two guitars, you know, this guitar is conflicting with something, so I'm going to leave that guitar open and solo other tracks that might be kind of causing a sonic, you know, that might be clashing with it. That's a quick way of finding it using the solo defeat. Okay, so that, you know, so it's not necessarily a legacy feature nowadays, but, you know, you could be creative with it. Okay, so a question, can you safely normalize audio when exporting in Cubase Nuendo? Does normalizing damages your audio even if you've mixed it with the same dB true peak? You can normalize, you know, generally I would do the normalizing after the mix down, you know, just to be safe, to have kind of like what your actual mix down file is. So, you know, so that's always a good thing. And one of the functions in Nuendo that's kind of unique is when you do an export audio mix down, you could have it normalized, because a lot of our Nuendo customers are using, you know, are going out for broadcast, and generally broadcast, at least in the United States, you know, there's now kind of broadcast volume guidelines, you know, and that's why we have kind of the, you know, the LUFS or loudness units or the EBU R128, kind of different names for the same standard. So like in Nuendo, you can say, I want to send this out for broadcast. And, you know, one of the issues got to be, I remember, like, I'm based in Washington, D.C. area near Discovery Channel. So lots of my friends did post-production work for Discovery. And one day when they kind of switched to loudness units as their for their volume standard, everyone got this kind of cryptic email saying, you know, you must deliver at minus, you know, 24 loudness units from now on. That's what we're looking for. If not, we're going to run your mix through a quality control machine, and your mix could get rejected, and you have to remix it on your own dime if you don't comply. And so I got this call, like, you know, literally like 13 times in a row. And one day it's like, what does this mean? Am I okay? Am I okay? What? I don't understand. So in Nuendo, you could actually say when you export to normalize at minus 24 loudness units, so that when you create the files, they're automatically going to be normalized to the broadcast standard. So I don't think that's in Cubase, but it's currently a Nuendo feature for post-production. So, but as a rule of thumb, I would normalize after the export audio mix down, so you have kind of the original file. Okay, so I see nice comment from Paul Claridge. Good to see you on a Hangout. Hello, Greg. Thanks again. My Groove Agent is working great now. You showed me the settings. That's great. Glad to hear it, and glad to see you on a Hangout. Okay, so I just see a comment from Rye. Can you play the track again? So I'm not sure which track it was, but if you let me know, I could maybe play it a little bit later. Okay. Okay, so I see some discussion on dB values and EQ. Let's see, I have a phone call coming in. All right, so I'm going to blow off Chuck Ainlay, famed engineer Chuck Ainlay, to talk to you guys. So I'll call him back after the Hangout. Okay, so question. Do you know if Nuendo behaves well with Avid hardware like the S6 console? Trying to convince the Foley artists in my studio to use it. But we run everything through an S6. So the S6 is based upon Yukon, which is a controller protocol that was actually written in conjunction with Steinberg and Euphonics. So it was a Euphonics protocol that Steinberg was the first company to support. So ironically, many people find that Nuendo's integration with Yukon is superior to Avid's. So it's kind of interesting because we were kind of in on it. And then they kind of purchased the Yukon protocol and doesn't seem to have moved very much forward. But yeah, Nuendo works great with Yukon enabled device. So. Okay, so we have a question. Could you please explain about constrained delay compensation? All right, so let's go ahead and set up a project here. All right, so let's say I'm playing an electric piano. Now, sometimes as you have different plugins on your track, anytime that you add a plugin, it could impose, think of it like a tax of latency. So as I play, I'll just kind of hit my keyboard controller hard. And you can probably hear in the microphone, my controller and the MIDI note pretty tight. All right, now let's say I had different plugins. Let's say I was one of those who likes to put all my mastering chain during my entire production and tracking process. So I'm going to come over here and add two multi-band compressors. Okay. Now, as we add particular plugins, these plugins can cause delay because they take a while to actually process. And we see this sometimes with mastering plugins. So when we look at this, I hit my keyboard and that's delayed. And we could actually see the amount of the delay in when we go to our mix console. So we could actually look at, we say, let's go to F3, and then we have the ability to have channel latency. So now those two plugins have created 248.1 milliseconds. So that's a quarter of a second that was on the system. So now as I come here, when I hit the note to when the note sounds, it's a quarter of a second off. Now, if you have a lot of these plugins spread throughout the project, and if you have these kind of cumulative plugins, these delays add up. Now, you could go through and find every plugin that causes a lot of delay, but often when you want to play, you just want it to play back in time. So if I wanted to, let's say I have this particular channel open, and then I hit the constrain delay compensation button, what it's going to do is it's going to bypass the plugins that have a lot of latency. So as I play in, I don't have the latency. Once I deactivate the constrain delay compensation, those plugins are turned on. Let's say for playback, once I've recorded in, I don't need to hear You know, I don't need the latency isn't going to matter to me. But instead of having to shut off multiple plugins, where you turn off 13 plugins and then you turn on 12, and it's like, why doesn't the mix sound the same? You know, so here, that's one button, and that will bypass all of your latent plugins that are going to cause performance issues when playing MIDI. So that's what the constrained delay compensation does. And we see this in the lower left-hand corner here of the transport. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I just see I have harmonic scale and Phrygian scale and Locrian scale and Mixolydian scale and a couple other scales. Let me know if anyone needs these scales within chord pads. I'll help you install it into your pads. That's nice. But you could also do some, you know, something that some people miss, like when going to chord track, you could also, you know, if you don't have it, you know, one thing that people aren't necessarily aware of, let's say if we have our scale here, we could choose to say automatic scales. We could turn that off and we could double click, and then you could change the scales here for the piece and thus the chords as well. But that's very generous of you to share your presets. All right, so, you know, so I just see a question. Also, could you please tell us how to reduce the plugin delay? So I think that's kind of, you know, this from the same person asked about the constrained delay compensation. So that's what the constrained delay compensation does. Okay, so you see how to adjust music project to time code of the video in video player. So if, let's come over here. So if you have the video burned in, one of the things that you could do, let me just jump to a project that has some video in it. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Get this project loaded up. So one of the things to be aware of when you have your video is to make sure that the SMPTE time code is correct. That the SMPTE frame rates are the same. So if you go to your project setup, which you could hit Shift plus S, or go to your project menu to project setup at the bottom, one of the things you could do is actually get the frame rate from the video itself. So, and a lot of times, you know, you may have, like we see this in American versions of Cubase. In Europe, you know, for the longest time, the default frame rate was 25 frames a second. In America, we thought we were special, so we gave all sorts of different frame rates that, you know, and then we could have drop frames, and, you know, it gets to be very interesting on different timecode frame rates. So if I have it set to 30 frames a second, I could just say, get the frame rate from the video as well. But let's say if we have the video time code enabled, so let's say if I'm here, and I see that, you know, okay, my project starts at, let's say I want it to be 1:21:23. You could go to your project setup here and say the project start time. So let's say 01:21:23. And at this point, you could have the project just start. So it'll ask you, and then at that point, you could start the project, you know, at different points through some of those windows. So you could just do that again with the project start time. So you could do that, and you could also do, display time offsets. So if you said, I'll just revert this quickly. So let's say if I just want to do, so let's say I want this to be 23:16, and you could have some different options, and you could play around with some of these different scenarios. So let's say you have modified the time code offset. Do you want the project content at the time code position? So I'll just say no. So you could, do different offsets in the project setup window. So let's say if I have that set up, so, you could make those offsets there. Okay, so I just see a question from Jeff. When is it necessary or smart to use the mastering plugin when exporting? Is it only to render to a different output resolution? So if it is, I'm not sure which the mastering plugin is. There is a plugin in the mastering section for the UV22. So at this point, we could, and you probably would want to run this. So if you go to mastering here, you could run the UV22 plug-in there. So that's when you want to go down to a lower resolution file. So if you're doing, let's say a mix at, 32-bit 48K or 16-bit 44.1, when you're going down from the native resolution, you want to dither it. That's when you'd want to use the UV22 HR. All right, so we see a question from Dina. Is there a way to paste specific number repeats like in good old Cakewalk? So, I don't know how that worked, but if we come here, let's say I have this particular file, I could say Control K, Control or Command K, and we can say how many repeats. I want 16 repeats, hit OK. And then you could just simply see 16 repetitions of that event. So select the event, hit Control or Command plus K, and that'll open up the repeat dialog. And we could also do this as shared copies. So let's say I want 16 shared copies. And what the shared copy allows you to do is as I move the note here, that will move, any change I make in this part will be reflected in all of the shared parts. So some other ways to make a copy that a lot of people kind of miss as well is, let's say if we go to the right edge here, I'll just undo some of these. You could go to the right edge in the center and drag across. That's another good way. You could also, if you wanted to, hold down the Alt key, hold down the Alt or Option key. You could go to the bottom right-hand corner and drag. You could also say, I want to take these events here and just hit Control or Command D to duplicate. So there's 3 or 4 ways of doing events, but if you want a specific number, just hit Control or Command plus K. All right, so question, is there a way to use my control surface to control my audio faders without using the MIDI faders. Stupid question, I know, or maybe I need an explanation of MIDI fader versus audio fader. So it's there's a number of different ways, depending on your control surface. But if you didn't want to use your MIDI faders, let's say, I wanted to use my modulation wheel, I could do stuff like that as well. So, you could use like track quick controls. So let's say I go to an audio track. Okay, so we could say, okay, I want to go to my track quick controls, and I wanted to load up like volume. So as I come here, let's say I just wanted to use my modulation wheel for volume while on a track. I could go to my studio, to studio setup. We could add we could go to our track quick controls. And at this point, I could just say learn. I move this knob. And at this point, if I wanted to adjust my volume of this particular track, I just using my modulation wheel. So any parameter that you want to adjust your volume, and if you want it, your panning to be your pitch bend, you could do stuff like that kind of, very easily using, if you didn't want to use your faders. So you could use your MIDI faders for volume. You could use your, it's often harder for many control surfaces for their audio faders to transmit MIDI data, which should be easy, but most people just kind of, most control surfaces aren't designed for that for some reason. Okay. Hi, Greg. I've recently been working with podcasts. Would you have any tips on how to record a phone conversation using Nuendo? Cheers and greetings from Berlin. Okay. So I guess it's probably, I know that there's like for regular phones, that there's like a phone tap device that people will use where you plug, the headset, you take the connection of the phone into this little box, and then you could take the audio, output of that to go in, if you're doing cell phones. I know people that will use, that will just record, from the line out, or people use an app to record phone conversation and lay in a WAV file. So depending on what kind of phone it is, some people will I've seen some people do, Bluetooth. I've seen some people also use, just a headphone out. So there's different settings, and, we can take the headphone out and record it, so it depends if you're both talking on the phone. But I know the old days, people like radio stations would often just kind of use a device, and you can find them at broadcast stores for like a traditional phone where you could take the audio coming out of the phone and patch it into a console or to an audio interface and record it. Okay. All right, so I see, is Cubase recommended to create minimal techno like Boris Brejcha style? It could definitely be used for just about any style of music. So there won't be any issues with that. So, if you wanted to record heavy metal bands, you want to do jazz, you want to do classical, you're composing a film, you're doing hip hop stuff, Cubase can work equally well for all those genres. Okay. Okay, just reading through comments. All right, so I see question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to have Cubase handle multiple audio interfaces? If not, will this be available in future releases? So, the issue with doing multiple audio interfaces is, as Cubase is recording or sending audio out, Cubase wants it to be to know exactly when it's going out, because there's nothing worse than having audio that's out of time from itself. So when you go out of multiple audio interfaces, what happens a lot of time is that the two interfaces can't clock together accurately. So once you kind of hit play, the audio, there's no way for the audio to resolve to itself. So it's not synchronizing because there's not a common clock. So, on the Mac, you have Core Audio where you could utilize an aggregate device, but that compounds the latency. So if you had 12 milliseconds in one interface and 10 in another, your latency is now 22 milliseconds, and there's a lot of kind of pitfalls with it, but that's kind of the reason why we kind of stick to a common and why most programs will stick to using one audio interface, because that way the program knows that when it's sending out time that it's being correct and it's kind of going under a unified structure. So just a comment from Jeff. The Grand has a lot of great pianos. It really is a pretty amazing piano source. All right, so we have someone checking in. Hello, I'm Dragos from Romania. Welcome to the Hangout. All right, so I see Jeff commenting, punch points in selection range. Excellent. That's great. I have a question. Do you think the current Cubase Pro and future Cubase will be the standard or the first thought to use like Pro Tools is? We have lots and lots and lots of users. So, I think if you look at all the different versions of Cubase, there's more Cubase versions out there than anything else. But, so there's lots of people using it. Our business is growing, our business is doing great. So we see lots of people migrating and moving towards Cubase all the time. Okay. Okay, so I see a question from Tutor's Project. What interface sound are you using? So I'm not sure if this is directed to me, but for the Hangouts, what I'm using is a Yamaha or a Steinberg UR24C. So just when I go to my studio setup, this is kind of what I'm using for my interface. So it's kind of a USB 3 interface, so works great for all my Hangouts. It's kind of the one I use in my office. So I see, hello, Greg, can you tell us when can we expect Cubase 11 this year? Regards, from Fox Productions. So I'm sure there's a lot of people working on it. So, and usually it gets released when it's all done. And so, but it'll be pretty German and on a schedule. So if you look maybe at past years, they can, keep the schedules pretty well. So, but we'll see when it comes out and we'll let you know when it's available. Okay, so question, is there any way to have tracks have different repeat times to create polyrhythms, i.e. select a range for each track for the whole project? So let's come over here quickly. I'll just do a new project. All right, so let's come here. All right, so say I'll just look for a particular. All right, so say. All right, so let's do a quick like polyrhythm type of thing. So you could do this a couple of different ways. So let's say I just wanted one measure here. All right, so let's say I'll just do some bad step entry music. All right, so say, let me just. Okay, so I'm just going to set this to bars and beats here. All right, so let's say I want to put in. And let's say I just wanted to put in something different here. Right, and I wanted this to be more in. All right, so let's say I just want to do this in. All right, so I'll take this, and I'm just going to take these 3 notes and duplicate. So now I have like, just a 4/4 top, 3/4 in the bottom. Worst composition of all time, but that shows you one way of doing it. Now, let's say if you wanted to put in like another part here, so let's say I'll just do. just look for a particular instrument here real quick that I had in mind. Okay, so say just a quick lute. Okay, so let's say if I just recorded something here, so you could just go. So if I have just that little section, one thing that a lot of people don't know, it's kind of it could be a bit awkward, but we could have this set up for an independent track loop. So what this is going to allow us to do, and we could activate this directly from the icon here. So I could just say, we're going to take just this little part of data. I'll blow this up so you can see it a little better. Okay. And I just wanted to take this particular range, and then we could just have this playback, just that little. Let me just. But you could have kind of the editor have its own independent track loop, but you could do kind of, you could record these at, different time intervals to have kind of polyrhythmic stuff if you wanted to. But all right. Okay, so a question. Just got Absolute 4. Can I just use my Steinberg USB-E license, or do I have to have both connected to my PC? So your one USB-E licenser that you have for Cubase can also hold your Absolute 4. I think I have about 100 licenses on my USB-E licenser. So they could all be on one simple, one unified USB interface. All right, we're doing well on time. All right. All right, so we see sub 403 has to run. Okay. Okay, so I see a great comment from Michael Teams. I still have my 16 8-channel Roland hard disk recorder. Still works. Storage is scuzzy orbs. Yeah. I had to throw away when I moved recently, just so many duplicative scuzzy drives and terminators. So it's kind of funny and comical. Thought it was so big and fast because of this scuzzy cable. And you look at like a USB 3 interface cable or USB-C, it's great. Okay, so I just see a question. I want to use the Cubase 10.5 with Alan Heath's QU32 Chrome. So as long as it has like a USB, I believe that Alan Heath has like a USB or maybe a Dante interface that you could definitely use that to track directly into Cubase. So no problems. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. My USB-E licenser split in half, probably from moving it too much over the years. I taped it together and it still works. I get a new one. How do I transfer data to it? So if you have your E licenser, we'll just kind of open it up. connect both interfaces. And then really what you do is you'll see kind of the interfaces, the licenses here. From your old interface, just drag it to your new, or from your old e-licenser. So your licenses, just make sure you're connected to the internet and just drag it over. And then that will drag the license directly to your new e-licenser. Very easy. All right, so I see from Filippo Salemi, Cubase 10 was better than 10.5. Sorry, why? I think 10.5 is pretty good, so I haven't run into any problems with it. So I think new features are, a lot of great welcome additions, the multi-tap delay, the comparison EQ, so... Okay. Sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Let me just, okay. I think I'm back to where I was. All right. So good to see Neurotic Nexus on Hangout. You don't have to worry if you're late. You could always watch it on a Hangout. If you're late, you just have to hit the like button. That'll be our new rule. So if you show up late for the Hangout, instead of getting a tardy slip like we're in middle school, you can now just have to hit the like button when you join. Okay, so I just see, hi Greg, thank you. When I press F4 for control room, the graphic is buggy. When the dev wants to fix this, and any chance to fix graphic issues in C10.5. So a lot of the graphics issues, could be related to the graphics driver. If you're on PC, you may want to just kind of check the scaling. So I think currently Cubase likes 100 or 200% for scaling for high DPI. So check your high DPI scaling and make sure that you have and check your graphics drivers. But I don't have any problems in my Windows 10 with control room. All right, so I see... So when I open Contact or EasyBass or Shadow Hills Class A, then wants to resize them, I have this issue. So I know that the Contact instruments aren't set up for high DPI support. So check your high DPI scaling resolution, and that will help. But a lot of your plugins, may not support high DPI. So. Okay. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to protect tracks from global write and read? If I enable global read, write, all tracks RW are turned on, if turned off. So let me see. I'm not sure. I'll take a quick look. So let me just go to a different project quickly here. Yes, I don't know of a way to globally disable or to disable tracks from global read and write, which is kind of, if you didn't want it, if you didn't want it to be global, that's why those functions are global. to make a difference. But, if you have particular tracks, that you are working on, maybe you could choose to organize them in a way that they're linked for, read and write status. So let's say if we go to the mix console and if we defined, different link groups. So if I wanted to come here and link, here you could do the record. Let's see so you could choose automation, read and write to be a linkable factor if you wanted to be, or just choose to, if they're in a folder, choose, I think we could, let's see. Yeah, so you could do that, but again, when you're going to a global function, it will function globally, and that's kind of the intention. Okay, just see a question or a comment from Jeff. Wavelab has the loudness standard capabilities. I think, when you actually go to normalize within Cubase as a version 10.5, so let's say if I go to processes to normalize, at this point, you could choose to normalize in loudness units or dB inside of Cubase. So you can do a lot of it inside of Cubase as well as Wavelab. Okay, so seeing more comments on loudness standards, but we could do that inside of Cubase. All right, so just seeing more kind of the graphics issues. So, it really does sound like a high DPI issue. So you could try disabling high DPI and see if that works. Okay, so I just see a comment from Dina. I do miss the scrub and jog wheel in Cubase 9 though. Used it a lot. So when you go to the functions are still available inside of the program. So if you go to your key commands, so if you want those, you could still map them. I think if you go to shuttle play, let's just do a quick search. So these are basically your, you could map these to different controls or keyboard shortcuts or controllers. So if you have, I'm trying to remember the little control, the little wheel the company made. It's often used by video editors, but you could use those to do your shuttle and kind of scrubbing directly inside of Cubase. So the functionality is still there. It's just not on the transport. So I miss it sometimes too. All right, just reading through comments. All right, so I just see another DAWs are doing away with the dongles and iLok dongles and using cloud-based ID. Will Cubase ever get rid of that as well? So, I'm sure that the people are looking at other solutions, but, we have a lot of people that like the especially when you get a new system, like having all your licenses, not on a cloud-based thing, but, I know that they're doing research on different systems, so we'll see what happens in the future. So, and as Dina mentioned, it works, not cracked yet, so. All right, hang on. Someone's knocking on my door. Okay, I'm back. All right, so. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so a question from Jeff. I work on MacBook Pro, sometimes my iMac. If no new recordings have been added, can the project file simply replace the project file.cpr and that will reflect all edits exactly as an update? Yeah, that's how it works. So if there's no missing files that have been done, all you have to do is copy over the new CPR file and then you'll be all set. Okay, reading through some more comments. All right, so question, how do you get rid of recorded guitar static? So you could do, so often, there's EQs that could work with that, but, one of the great things is using a tool like Spectral layers can work exceptionally well for this. So if I come, let's say I'll just add a quick audio track. And I'll just import a quick audio file. All right, so let's say if we have your typical single coil pickup vibe. So let's say if I wanted to come in here with spectral layers, so what I could do is select that file, go to my audio, let's go to extensions, and now we could open this up inside of spectral layers. I'll take it to full screen view. So spectral layers, what this does, and this is sold separately, but we could just kind of come here. So let's say, all right, so let's say just in this area here, there's just lots of, buzz and hum. So what I'm going to do is just kind of do a quick selection. So let's say I'll just kind of take this up. And at this point, what I want to do in spectral layers is we'll say noise reduction. I'm just going to register that noise. And now I'm going to go to noise reduction. And let's say I'll just do this. And now let's go ahead and just do a quick listen to it. So, but you could just kind of come over here and be able to, do lots of different processing. So let's say I'll just take that whole area and I'll just do this process again. So, you could definitely, do different aspects with spectral editing to kind of get rid of buzz and hum. So, and sometimes you'll see EQs that have like, different debuzzers and stuff like that. Okay. Okay, so as you see, hello again, Greg. Please explain, how can I use chord track with a MIDI line? When I use it, I hear all chord notes with my notes in MIDI. So what you want to do is, you probably have the chord track set to when you come over here, could be a real-time preview mode. So I will come over here. Let's just jump back to one of my other projects. So say I have an electric piano and I have a chord track. So I could just say, oops, sorry about that. Let me get my Cubase back up here. All right, I'm going to reboot my Mac really quickly and just hang on, and I'll be right back. Just give me a minute or two. And let's just see if it's... Okay, just hang on for a minute. I'm going to reboot the Mac, and give me just a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I think we'll be back now. All right, I'm just going to check. All right, just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so we had a question about how not to hear the chords as we were playing. All right, so if I have, let's say, a piano part here, and I'm just going to check my audio connections quickly. Okay. Okay, so when I have a chord track, and if I wanted to not hear the chord tracks as they're kind of playing back and auditioning, all you have to do, and this will happen while it's doing tracks, is just to mute the chord track. So now as we change, it's not going to play back during playback. So at that point, you could say, So while we play here, it's not going to just trigger that particular chord in the middle. So let's say if I have this going on and I have the chord track unmuted, it'll play that back. But if the chord track itself is muted, so I'll just come here. So that's really kind of all you had to do with that. All right. Okay, so I think I lost some different questions during my reboot. Let me see if I could get some of it back. Okay, I'm just going to see if I can scroll back here. Okay, so I know we had some questions that were mailed in, so let me get to those. Okay, so I see just a question. I use SoftTube Console plugin 1 on every channel, audio effects group to be able to mix with the Console 1 hardware. Is there a way to have the Console 1 plugin automatically on the first insert when I create a new track without having to do it manually? So there isn't a way to do that automatically, but you know, an easy way of doing it. Let's say if I want a particular insert on all these tracks is just to select the tracks, enable quick link, and at this point just say, you know, I wanted this compressor on every single track, and those will all be loaded onto that particular track. So it's pretty straightforward to work with. All right, another question is mailed in. Can you explain the difference between the linear and musical mode on the track in the inspector and on the clip in the info bar? When do you need to use track, and when do you need to use the info bar one? So if we have our tempo set to, let's say, 100 beats a minute, and I want my drum loop to automatically follow the particular time tempo of the project. So if I drag this over, let's say we started on the beat here. If musical mode isn't turned on, this will kind of just play back at whatever tempo. So let's say if I change my tempo now to, let's say 120 beats a minute, and we have the metronome going, they're not going to be lined up. So we can think of musical mode as being for the actual event itself. So now I put musical mode on. We have the click track. Then that's automatically going to comply. Now we may also want to have different tracks that as we work, let's say if I put a ruler track, and I want to see this in seconds. And let's say below, I want to see a ruler track in bars and beats. All right, so we come here. I could see the times. Now, we also have musical mode and linear mode in regards to how the track will relate. So if I'm in musical mode and I change the tempo from 120 beats a minute up to a different tempo, we see that it's going to stay the same value in the bars and beats, but the value here is changing as we adjust the tempo. So in musical mode, this is staying locked to the bar and beat. Now, when we're in, let's say, linear mode, what this is going to enable you to do is as we change the bar and beat, we're going to see that it's locked to the time, not to the bar and beat. So this is when we're in linear mode, I adjust the tempo. So we see that the time stays constant, but the bar and beat itself will change. So the position will change. So depending on which mode you have activated, you can see what, it's changing in time, but if it's changing based on bar and beat or it's changing based on the actual seconds. Okay, so we had someone that wanted to, if we had a number of input channels, I'll do a new project quickly. When we go to, let's say, I'll go to my VST connections and let's add some input channels. So let's say I have a number of input channels here for tracking. Okay, I have in my mix console here, so I can see those in my mix console. Let's say I add a couple of audio tracks, a few audio tracks there, so we can add these. And now when I go to my input output, we could, globally enable to see kind of all of my inputs. So the question is, why can't we just change the order here to see them? Why don't the input channels reflect? I can see why, it's a bit incongruent with like the channel settings. So as I move channel 3 here, that's reflected. But, I'm not sure if you really, need to move the input channels. I can see maybe if you, patched your inputs wrong, but I can see where it's not as high a priority, as a lot of times these are kind of fixed to their input states. Okay. Okay, so we had a question about memzap that we kind of touched on a little bit last time. So the question is, as I understand it, you can memorize a specific zoom setting, then change the zoom and zap switch between those two settings. In my case, this does work only when you hit play the track in the memorize setting and then stop or pause the track. It switches between the start and pause position in the zoom setting. So it seems to lose the second setting. Strangely enough, when you play a track from within the second zoom setting, the zap function works. And then, okay, so it says there's no way to zoom both horizontally and vertically within the program presets. The zoom undo function seems to come closest to that, so the memzap thing would be a very useful addition. So if we have a project, let me just open one here. And I wanted to zoom vertically and horizontally at the same time. A really easy way to do this is just hold down the zoom key with the control or command and say I wanted to zoom that section. That way we could just zoom what we looked over and double click to zoom back to our previous setting. So if I wanted to just see what's going on, just right in there, we could do that and then double click with the zoom tool. Now where the memzap can come in handy is that will also kind of store the different presets, like a zoom position. So, if I'm here, this is really handy for, I just want to see these tracks in the drums, double click. So you could zoom vertically and horizontally simultaneously. Now, what the memzap is going to allow you to do is, let's say I'm working on this part of the vocal, and I come here, and I really want to just edit, just that particular aspect. So I'm going to just do a quick memzap, and you could set this in the key commands under the zoom settings. So we could choose to, there's a zoom zap as well as a zoom mem. So I'm going to store this particular position, like this value here. So let's say I want it to be at measure 16 or measure 18 here. So I'm going to come here and store that. And now when I want to come back, I could just hit the key command to go right back to where I was, but it'll take you directly to that position. So if I'm zoomed in here and I want it to jump back, that's kind of like my stored snapshot for Zoom. But if you want to automatically, zoom vertically and horizontally, try to control or command with the zoom key and double click, and then you can still always go right back to your MEMS settings. Okay. Okay, so let me go back to the live feed. We have a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Sorry if I lost some questions. All right, so just saying comment on evolution of MIDI. So it started around 82, 83. So right. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so just see a question. I cannot see control recording while recording when I stop record. I can see what I done, ? All right, so I think what this is related to is in a controller for a MIDI part. So I'll just kind of jump over here. All right, so let's say I'm in this MIDI part here. I'm seeing the editor, and I wanted to record pitch bend. So I hit record, and let's make this the active project. That would help. Okay, so all right, so I'm here. And I want to record, modulation wheel or some MIDI CCs. So I come over here, let's say I hit record. And I record my modulation wheel. So let's say I do pitch bend. All right, but a lot of times, let's say if I undid that, and let's say I have my modulation wheel selected here, and now I want to record. So I record, so I can hear the modulation wheel. I'm recording, but I don't see it being written in until I stop. And the question is why? Why is because we need to enable record within the editor. So if you go to the upper left-hand corner, and now as we record, it'll just be... So if I turn that off, I don't see the changes. I turn it on, I move the mod wheel, I see the changes. So just enable the record within the editor, and that should help. All right, so I just see a question. Hello, Greg. Talking of e-licenses, can I drag them to Groove Agent or vice versa? Thanks. Would free up a USB port. Any of the licenses, you could consolidate all to a single USB e-licenser, so there's no problem. All right, so... it's a problem with global read write. If you hit it accidentally, it will mess all your tracks, which had read enabled, for instance. There's a certain, if you enable global read write, it'll, globally read or write. That's kind of exactly what the function is intended to do. So, it's like analog tape. If you didn't want to erase tracks, don't record over them. So it just, maybe try to be careful when you use that particular function, and you could do it on a track by track basis or do linking if necessary. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Is there any way to save project later, not at the very beginning of every session? I have too many untitled projects. Thanks. Well, you don't have to save at the beginning of every session. So you could do, once you name the project, you could do this. But if you, so when you start a project, it's always, what I do is kind of start a project. I define a folder, and then, I will save a project file. So if you wanted to, but you could do if you do a save, and name the project, that way you won't have a whole bunch of files that are just kind of, completely, untitled 01 through untitled, 412. So, try just, when you do it, save it once, and then the projects, especially if you have the preference set, can make backups for you automatically. So if you go to preferences to general, you could then enable all of the, autosave backups to be done as well. All right, so saying Ace has learned a ton in these sessions, and you're welcome. Glad I could help get people a little farther along with their Cubase journey. All right, so just see question. My expression maps articulations are not working. Any tips? You could check to make sure, that, I'm not sure if they were working previously and then stopped working, or if it was, but let's say if you wanted to go to, but, make sure that the library, sometimes people will go to, let's say if you go to the expression map, make sure that you have the correct expression map utilized, but, that should definitely kind of do the trick for you, unless it's like the wrong expression map. So if you know that it's, that was working before and not, that you could let us know. All right, so we have to wrap up in just a minute, but I see a question. Hey, Greg, what kind of producer would you recommend? Cubase 2, and do you have a channel dedicated to learning it? I'm looking to make music for TV, commercials, video games, and other forms of media. So, any of those work great. It's so a lot of times, I do a lot of presentations. I think Sonic Scoop has one of my kind of normal demos that I usually do for stores and public events, where I kind of do it as, this is Cubase for people doing hip hop and EDM. This is Cubase for people doing recording bands. This is Cubase for composers, and my point that I try to make is that it's equally strong in all those different tasks. So I think Cubase does kind of the best at, meeting the needs of so many different types of projects. And that's why, people will work with it. So it works really great for anything. All right, so yeah, spectral layers. I just see a question from Jeff. Spectral layers are such a tease. Would you use a DBX unit or spectral layers for my TAC A3340S? I remember that machine very well from the 70s, early 80s to clean up signal noise. So, you're going to be dealing with, probably digitally. So, use spectral layers. It's great. Okay. See a comment, I need to clean my desk, Greg. I've been hearing that since my second grade teacher. But it's been a bunch of make screenshots for people. Okay. So we're just about out of time. I'm going to make sure that we end so we have our closed captioning for everyone. So I want to thank everyone for the great hangout. I will be in meetings for work next Tuesday. So our next hangout will be on Friday, a week from today. I hope that everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And we'll see everyone on Friday. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy. Take care.